Hey, good evening, Littleton. Welcome to the Nagog Hill Orchard Working Group, Ad Hoc Working Group, the new slimmed down and aerodynamic version. We have a quorum, so I will declare the meeting open at 7:31 p.m. The first order of business is the minutes of prior meetings. We have, I believe, 4 or 5 minutes. So if anyone has corrections or adjustments, let me know.
So the first minutes on order, Chair, if you'd like me to do this, is
Yeah, sure.
April 18th, 2024.
Okay.
I do not have any, does anyone have any omissions or corrections? If not, do we have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve minutes of.
Okay. I second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Perfect.
Cool.
Next one is April 25, 2024. There are 3 pages to those minutes. Does anyone have any edits or amendments or anything? If not, do we have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve the minutes.
I second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Next is May 1st, which are 2 pages. May 1st, 2024. Anyone have any changes or updates? If not, I make a motion to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. The next is May 6th, 1 page. Anyone have any omissions? This was a very short one. This was the discussion of MOUs with the Select Board.
Yep.
Do we have a motion to accept as written?
Motion.
I second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Last one is May 22, which was a long one. The only thing I had was I'd like to add underneath where we went through the approval of the minutes. This was the first meeting post town meeting vote, and we did have some discussion about that. So I just want to say, doesn't matter what the discussion was,
Okay.
but just that it occurred. So that's my only addition to May 22.
So noted. I will make that change
Okay. I make a motion to approve. Do we have a second?
Second.
as amended.
As amended.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you very much. There was also a joint meeting with the Select Board, which the minutes for the Select Board covered that, so that is also done. I think there's one remaining meeting that I can't find the minutes for, so I'll have to keep looking for that.
Okay.
So the next item on the agenda is RFP responses. And I think it's important to note that there were 3 responses to our RFP for lease. There were actually 4 people responded, but one of them was not complete, and so we are not going to consider it. We can't consider it. So there were three responses. This whole working group has read them and evaluated. I don't know if you've evaluated them, but we have read them and we know what they are. So I think the first thing to discuss tonight, I have some questions. One is, what's the process for evaluating and who should do it? Another one is, how much information do we want to share about the proposals? And the final question is, who is going to eventually make the final decision? I know that legally it's the Select Boards. However, they have, agreed to abide by the decision of, I think the working group. So I think there's a process discussion to be had about the future of this working group. Is there a subcommittee just for evaluation? But let's begin with, I guess, the process of evaluating and who should be involved.
So I guess my question is, because we just discussed the MOU, which was originally slated for a purchase, if we're just going to keep the same kind of thoughts and streamline process for that for a lease, which really did just encompass what was the original working group, to bring forth our suggestion collaboratively with the Board of Selectmen. So if we want to kind of keep that up, recognizing, as you stated, that this committee is smaller, but to keep the process going, I'd like to just keep the process going, and if we can work just with our committee, that would be great.
With additional people, like as we originally described in the MOU?
I think,
Or just this
well,
committee?
as the minutes stated with the MOU, is that we thought it was going to take a longer process to bring other people in to make sure that they knew the history. If you wanted to ask former members if they can add to that, I'd be keen on that. But I think to bring in a layperson at this date might slow the process down. And that was stated in some of the minutes before.
Okay, so I do recall that. So I think your proposal is follow the process of the MOU, even though the MOU never went into effect because the town meeting article failed. Follow the process of the MOU in as much as the working group, with the assistance of maybe additional people who are subject matter experts, who have the context, evaluate it, and we present that evaluation to the select board. And the select board essentially has agreed to abide by the decision that we make. Is that a good summary?
It is, but I don't know if everybody supports that or not, so it's up to you all.
What do you think? I'm open to any suggestions.
That sounds reasonable to.
Okay.
kind
So,
of-
so this group will make a recommendation of which of the three to go forward with.
If any. Yeah. Like, we don't have to offer it to anybody if we don't feel that any of them are qualified.
Okay, I'm fine with that.
Okay.
And I think for the general public to understand, it's just our recommendation, and then at that point is where you all, as select board members, negotiate the final nuances of an agreement.
Correct.
So that's, we just want to be clear to the
Yeah.
public that that's not what we do.
Thank you, because I was about to say that too.
Thank you.
I think that it would be fine for this group to recommend, here are some criteria that we think is important to put in the lease.
Sure.
But, of course, that is not our domain.
Okay.
One thing that I discussed with our town administrator was, it is fine for us to interview the applicants if we want. We would have to interview all three of them and interview them with the same set of questions. However, we don't have to make this decision based solely on their written application. We can ask them to come in and answer questions and have feedback with them if we desire. So I'm going to throw that out there as a
And
possibility.
effectively an executive session, or is it an open session?
I didn't get that far with him.
Or we could even ask some written correspondence. What is your response to?
Yeah,
this
we
as
could do
well?
that as well. That's true. We
So-
could do that as well, but.
Some might.
But Jim's point was, sometimes you have a different feeling about someone when you're sitting and
Yep.
talking to them face to face. Okay. So I think that is a very reasonable process. Do we want to discuss who we are going to talk to in addition to the four of us tonight? I mean, I believe that, like, Brad, Jen, and Amy would be obvious choices
If they're willing.
if they're willing to do it, because they have all of the
Well,
knowledge.
they know the land, too.
Does that, any objections, any comments, anybody else that we think would be super valuable?
I mean, that would be fine with me as fairly recent members, so.
Okay.
I guess to me, it depends what kind of questions we come up with if we have questions, need feedback or something, then that could involve different people, but I would say that the group is pretty comprehensive there.
I don't want to do anything that slows the process down. I don't think we have a lot of time,
Right, I agree.
right? I think, in the next, I will say, in most next 2 weeks, we have to pick which of these RFPs we're going forward with or none. Because the lease process, I was involved in these negotiations last time, and they went on forever, right? And even if we set a deadline for the lease, we still need a reasonable time period. It's going to take months to do a lease, right? Just the back and forth between the lawyers takes a long time once you've kind of agreed to the terms. And I don't want to lose another season,
Okay.
basically. And if the lease does fall through, we need to be ready for Maytown meeting
Right,
for whatever, or we may need to be ready for Maytown meeting regardless, right?
Yeah, okay,
Because the lease doesn't deal with the house, so.
okay. Okay, so I agree with that. I think that's a very solid plan. I mean, I don't know if those three will want to participate, but we absolutely can ask them and see what they say. I think if it's only three applicants, it may be not that much time. So then I guess the next one is, how much do we want to discuss the actual responses tonight? Do we want to get into that, like to talk about, to announce it? Or do we, what we could also do is come up with the draft version of the criteria that we're going to use?
I think that would be helpful, having gone through the process before of what we thought the criteria would be, looking at it for a potential purchase, but now looking at it from a lens of a lease. I know upon first review, I think we have 3 really strong applicants, but they all have different relationships to farming.
Yeah,
So, and I want to follow the town and the Morrisons' wishes of protecting this land and farming this land.
okay.
So that's, for me, following back of the, former missions. But
Okay.
I also wear the Conservation Commission hat too, so.
Yeah.
and you wear the farming hat, so.
Okay.
Yeah, so I welcome the opportunity for, I didn't bring my notes for the old criteria, but I don't know if you have them.
I do, I can, if our intrepid Zoom master will promote me.
I also think it's much better to go through and decide the criteria independent of talking about the RFP, so that it doesn't appear as if we're deciding the criteria based on
Yep.
our preference.
Yep.
So,
There you go.
Can you change the settings so that I can present?
You should be, screen share.
No, I can't. It's the setting. It says that it's not. Oh, here we go. Got it. Okay. Woo. Let me see if I can find this screen. So the first thing I can do is I can go through this, have you seen my, okay. This is not ideal here, sorry. I wasn't ready for this. This was the,
We only have like 4 or 5, didn't we?
yeah, I
Can we
mean,
just read them out?
sure.
They
So,
could all still just be the same.
well, so there's 2 sets. There's the set that we put in the RFP for lease, and then there's this set which we came up with for the sale. And I believe this, so this actually may not be the final version, because I think I proposed this version, but,
Are you talking about the one where we were scaling, where Brad was talking about what the
Yeah.
weighted measures
Yeah.
were? I don't know that we actually finalized what that
Okay.
was, though. That was still part of a discussion of where the weights were. That was back when we did the RFI.
okay. So what we can do is I can look at the RFP, and we can go and look at the criteria that we had here. Boop. Okay. Experience operating or managing a farm. Fewer than 3 years, 3 to 5, 5 to 10, more than 10. Capital investment plan for equipment. No plan, minimal plan, large and intention to operate as an orchard in conventional manner plan, substantial plan. Experience in licensing for pesticide, and the comprehensiveness and quality of the proposed management plan. Those are the only 4 that we had. Yeah. So we could add information about conservation, about maintaining it as an orchard or part of it as an orchard.
Well, I think what we discussed is following the APR rules that 50% of the land has to be commercially viable.
Right.
Or used. So we have to finish that, so it doesn't matter if it's apples or
Well, no,
something else.
I'm saying we could ask that part of it remain as an orchard. We could say that we want, like, criteria would be part, like a pick your own section is preferable to not, for example.
We could, but I feel like we should have put that in the RFP, so people could have said, yes, I'm willing to keep some of that. Like, it might be nice, and that could be part of the public outreach, if they want to do pick your own or something as well.
Okay.
I feel as though, for me, the criteria is really to be able to work with the land and have a commercially viable farm of any means.
Correct.
So I think that, for me, regardless of who applies, I think is important.
So do you
That way
think,
we can honor the APR without hesitation, and that helps support the town as well.
do you think that the criteria that were listed here covers that?
The
Well, I think
criteria
that-
is leaning towards orchard. In the, I think it's the second one down. The experience maintaining an orchard in a conventional manner, the one, you're just on it.
Right,
Okay,
especially when you talk about pesticides, because if somebody wants to go organic, you don't have to have a pesticides license, correct?
Correct.
well, don't you still use pesticides? You just don't use the.
It's
you don't-
organic, though.
You don't have to use license, you don't have to have a license for that
You
stuff.
may, but I mean, I would think
It would
it's,
be, well, whatever's organically approved
right.
for pest control.
So my reading of this criteria number 2, because it says farming operations in the title, I think that they said they're using orchard as shorthand for the property, not it's an orchard. So that's the way I read it. Basically, this is a capital investment plan for equipment that the respondent intends to use in the farming operations, not the orchard operations. Make sense?
Yes, but the orchard is mentioned like 4 times.
Yeah, but I think the orchard there just meant the property, not as an orchard. That we referred to the property and throughout the RFP as the orchard.
Right, yeah.
Understood.
Not that it was, that you have to be,
Because I tried to
As an
clean all of
orchard.
that up and determined that it was just too hard.
yes. Exactly.
Okay, so, so is there any, does everyone feel like these 4 criteria as they're laid out are the criteria that we're gonna use?
So I will say, when I put together, I spent a lot of time on this on the RFP, and I had a lot of questions about the pesticide one, whether it still belonged there or not,
Right.
if it's not an orchard. And I was convinced that we should leave it as the criteria, but it might be a lower weighted criteria than the others, right?
Okay.
The others could be 30% each, and that one could be a 10%, right? So we have to kind of decide
That's fine with me, I mean.
that. We could potentially come up with, a 5th and 6th criteria or whatever, if we wanted.
And I think that's where also the history of the discussion that has gone forth with this working group for 3 years, like, we talked about diversity of crops, because you have such drastic climate change, storm events, that if you go with one crop, that could be a one and done. So to really look who has diversity, who talked about soil retention and managing your soils and things like that. So I think to look at, we talked about really looking at the orchard from a holistic kind of like looking down at it. How do we make it so the orchard, meaning the land that it stands on, can be preserved for more generations and not having to change crops every 30 years or 40 years?
I agree with that. I think that's kind of covered in the 4th criteria, and we might want to say that 4th criteria now is 50%.
I was about to say that exactly.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
The management plan, we can specify the things that we want to see in a management plan.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think that diversity and soil conservation and stuff is a very reasonable things to add to that. Cool.
Yes, I'm coming at the diversity in the crops more from a cash flow for a successful business, so that you're using, as you're talking about, the seasonality of it,
Yeah.
spring, summer, fall, and potentially winter crops.
Yep.
Just to have somebody successful
Okay,
economically.
good. All right, so that's the criteria. Unless there's any other comments on that.
Can we just go through them one more time?
Yeah.
And you can just glaze over them.
Experience operating or managing a farm,
Okay.
3 years, 3 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 to more than 10. Capital investment plan for equipment that the respondent intends to use in the farming operations. No plan, minimal plan, substantial plan. Experience and licensing for pesticide applications. no experience, fewer than 3 to 5 years, more than 5 years, and comprehensiveness and quality of the proposed management plan. Doesn't meet the minimum requirements, just meets the minimum requirements, robust and detailed containing a more comprehensive plan than the minimum requested by the town.
So is it your thought with those 4 criteria that we would perhaps alter or shift the percentage? So like number 3 would now be a much lower and could be an optional if someone doesn't even need pesticides.
Yeah. I mean, I would go so far as to say like the management plan and the capital plan. The management plan is by far the most important. Capital plan is second. And then I think the experience is third and the pesticide is a distant fourth.
I'd be interested in your thoughts on that.
I could possibly flip the management and the capital investment, just because we know that the capital investment would be, is just such a significant portion of that. But there, I could go either way on that one.
Like 30% each for those two, 20% for the experience and 10% for the, or something like that.
Yeah, if they're weighted, yeah, I guess if they're weighted evenly.
I think I'm interested to follow the discussion of the farming experience, because I look at this differently. If it was going to be a sale, I could be like, hey, it's your own risk, you don't have as much experience. But now we're looking at someone who's a potential lessee. We want to make sure that they have enough experience to set them up for success. And that's the only reason that I kind of waver with that. So if someone only has 3 years versus someone who comes in that has 10, but I do agree the management and the capital is great, and they have to be really robust. But I want to make sure that someone's coming in that has some experience behind them, not just a pipe dream.
I agree with all that. I was wondering, just as I'm thinking through this, there's also another capital investment plan in like what the capital investment they're expecting from us.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so is that criteria number 5? Like, the town's minimally involved, we're spending millions, we're spending thousands, we're spending,
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, because that's a really 5th criteria, and that's weighted strongly. Like, what's the appetite to have a budget item, a line item?
Yeah, I agree. So, if their management plan is submitted doesn't include that, then I'd reach out to all 3 of the respondents and ask them for information so that we could properly evaluate their submissions.
Right. And I think while we've had numerous discussions, we need to understand if someone wants to lease all of it and they do in fact want the barns or things like that, what are we going to do to ensure it being safe, reliable, to give it to those people? So that's an investment there. So if you look at someone that doesn't need the barn and we don't have to make an investment right away, but yet they want trees taken out, so we have to look at what is the value of that ask for the town. It's like a whole other kind of sidebar.
Yeah, I think the town's investment in the deal is another criteria that we need to include. And what's the rating of that one, do you think?
Well, I think so. Now we've gone from 4 to 5.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a strong value. But I look at that fiscally as a strong value, but emotionally and commitment, and when we're now looking for a new partner. So someone may need a little bit more money, but they're going to offer a lot more in the end. Money meaning investment for the town to put in.
So maybe 30% for the capital and management plan.
30 each?
Yeah, 15% each for the town's investment and the experience, and 10% for the pesticide
I'd probably lower the pesticide,
to 5.
because you could lease, you could rent a pesticide person.
Yeah, and weighting, yeah, I think increasing the weighting of the town's involvement would be good.
Okay, so 30, 30, 20, 15, 5. 30% for the capital plan, 30% for the management plan, 20% for the town's investment, 15% for the experience, and 5% for the pesticide.
Say those
I-
again?
Is there a weight, or does this all just flow into discussion if someone's looking at the whole, like, the whole kit and caboodle, like every building, everything? Or as a potential, we know that some things we're not able to give them, we're just able to give them the APR land right now, but is there a weight to someone who wants to take really the care of everything versus, and I guess this comes
What do
up
you
to.
mean by everything?
Well, meaning like all the land and the buildings, like utilize to energize, bring life back into the top barn, the bottom barn, the cottage. Even though we know that's part of a separate negotiation, do we look at that applicant? Is that a different weight versus someone who just comes in and says, I don't need any buildings and I just want the land? Or does that come up with, is that weighted in as part of the management plan of what they're gonna do?
I would say we didn't include any of those structures in the RFP. In fact, we specifically excluded them.
Right.
So probably, I don't think it's necessarily fair.
The upper barns, I mean,
No, but you're talking about the lower barn and the cottage and stuff.
Yeah.
Like, I think in the house, like, it's probably not fair to judge someone based on their intentions on those if it was never even mentioned, or it was specifically excluded.
just for clarity, the house had to be excluded from the RFP because we cannot lease the house in its current condition. So there was nothing we could do, so.
Right, yeah.
I think that ultimately, what we do with all these numbers, it's not going to be like one of the applicants is at 92 and a half and one of them's at 93, and so we choose the one at 93. This is going to give us guidelines for discussion, and it's going to be, it's going to help everybody on the board and everybody who makes the decision to be on the same page as far as what they're thinking and to understand each other's criteria. But I think ultimately it's going to be like a consensus and not necessarily just driven by the numbers.
Okay,
So-
that makes me feel better, because I
Okay.
think that there is some subjective use here.
Yes, I agree, and I think it's going to have to be that way.
I
think
do
all of these-
feel the town has to, there's going to have to be money put into
Yeah.
this, so I'm a strong proponent of that.
The money is also kind of a negative one in this, right? In that, if the more money they want us to put in, then the lower their score would be, right? Versus the others.
That's true.
That's what I'm trying to, if you could have had somebody with a really robust management plan that was thought through and, was, very involved and detailed, and they also had the capital for that, but if you're, like kind of like a match. If they're
Right.
if their capital plan is to put in, several $100,000 or $1 million, and it's to the town's benefit to do that,
Right.
it wouldn't necessarily be a negative, but it has to flow with the long-term effect of the management plan.
We can't punish someone for identifying, right? Like, if they come up with a robust management plan that the town is forced to spend $3 million over 10 years, and someone else doesn't even think about it and has $0 over 10 years, I don't want to punish the person who came up with a good plan.
So we've just come
right?
full circle, so we're gonna remove that line item? We're gonna
No,
remove that percentage?
And that's where I assume that's where the percentages come
Right.
in. That if
Yeah.
you have the management plan and it's very, very detailed and comprehensive and everything, then you're putting that up
I was viewing it like, if you had two applicants, one that says, I will pay to remove the trees, and the other says, and I'm going to do X, Y, Z, and the other says, I'm going to do the exact same thing, but you're removing the trees,
Right.
right? In that case, you'd favor the one, all things being equal, where we didn't have to spend the money, that they were taking on the risk.
Right, but if someone comes up with a detailed plan for how the barn's gonna get renovated and reused, and it's gonna end up costing the town a lot of money, versus someone who doesn't have anything for the barn, are we punishing the person who has a detailed plan for the barn?
So it
because
sounds like the
costs more
management
money?
plan is really,
Yes,
Going to
if
be
you had
weighted.
someone that, person A came in and wanted to do something as simple as row crops or forage crops and needed the trees out of the way. And then you had somebody else that came in that wanted to do a crop every season that engaged perhaps retail sales and was a start to finish kind of a crop where you grew the crop and it was harvested and retailed. That would be a different kind of set of cash flows and management. Where if one wanted the town to move the tree, have the trees removed, and the other was willing to remove the trees themselves, but needed other amenities.
I mean, I'm with Sarah now, like, I think the management plan is like, gotta include that.
I think the management plan includes a lot of it, right? But I also think then when you look at the management plans, like if you had two robust management plans and one required us to spend $1 million and the other required us to spend $10,000, you're not necessarily saying the $1 million is. And so the management plans don't just stand on their own in that respect.
Yeah, okay,
That's where I was getting at from the
Okay.
capital.
So-
But I do think the management plan
okay.
covers a lot of this.
all right, so we're back to square one.
Go back to 4, thank you so much.
That's why it's all a discussion, so.
So how about, do we want to go with like 40% capital, 40% management plan, 15% experience, and 5% pesticide? And again, with the knowledge that this is not a hard and fast percentage number that's going to determine everything, it's just a way for us to evaluate everybody on the same playing field.
I mean, does leaving in the expectation of how much the town has to spend versus what, leaving in that fifth criteria, at least they have to state it. Where if that's not included in the management plan, you're asking a direct question of what are you expecting from the town and what can we expect from you?
So I think that is covered by the criteria of the management plan, which is like, if it's incomplete or it's not as detailed as someone else's, then you don't get a favorable.
I would have worded what Will said slightly different, and it requires us to evaluate it, right? We have to consider it, whereas we can look at the management plan and say, this is a great idea, and then not actually do our work to say, it's a great idea, but it's gonna cost the town $5 million to implement this.
Sure.
Right, so I like it having a criteria, whether it's something that we weight in such a way, but it's something that we should be considering when we're going through the management plans,
Right.
at the least.
So as we're reviewing those 40-odd points, where the expectation in that management plan is that evaluation of your needs
Yeah.
as a lessee would be. Okay. Okay, I think that's really helpful. That's good. Will, do you feel like the experience for farming and like diversity of crop, does that all fall under your farming experience, or does that really come up with your management plan, like your vision? Like where does a farmer that only wants to wear one hat versus someone who is more diversified, longer crop seasons, like, does that have any play here?
As far as their experience?
Or like, where would that fall in these 100 points? I just want to make sure it's weighted appropriately.
I mean, I guess it would go under experience if they,
I mean, wouldn't that
it's got to be part of both.
Okay.
If they have the experience of growing, of actually tending the crops, growing the crops, and then, the management plan, maybe that's more marketing and financing and
Okay.
So,
input costs.
So with that said, is it your thought that for the next meeting, hopefully quick, like next week, that then
Yeah.
we would all kind of digest and come up with the next meeting and have an open discussion of where we think each applicant is?
yeah, and I almost wonder if there's a more detailed set of like criteria where we break down the management plan and we have bullet points of the things we want to look at. Because Mark's point about, or Will's point about town investment as part of the management plan is a good one. There may very well be other items in the capital plan, for example, that I'm not thinking of that Will might come up with, or, is invasive control part of the capital plan or the management plan? Is
That's really management.
irrigation, is, if someone says, I want to turn it into a truck farm, I don't know what equipment they realistically need. Right?
And, as far as the invasives, that would go along with the pesticide.
Right. But you know what I mean, like if someone says, I'm gonna grow cabbages, I'm like, I don't know what John Deere model harvests cabbages, and how much they cost. So how do we evaluate their capital plan to make sure that they have the stuff that they really need?
And then, well, hopefully that would be answered under the experience. And, what have you grown a given crop and,
Yeah.
and
So I envision taking this, reviewing the three that we have, and then coming up with what are the questions we have for the applicants, like in addition to. And as Jim had said, same questions, but just
Okay.
maybe if there's something that we recognized, what we asked in the RFP wasn't fulfilling what we need, we can ask them all the same question.
Okay. So you think we should agree on those at the next meeting? Agree on the questions at the next meeting?
in the past, haven't we if we all have the same, we forwarded questions to someone, and if we all had the same question, then the question was forwarded or put out to the three applicants in between the meetings so that they could respond, so we had the answer for the next meeting.
So I think we need to know the questions before we do the evaluations.
Okay.
Because I would say that just a reasonable approach would be to cursorily do a quick read of the RFPs, see what questions you have that we should ask, either to the applicants or town council, if there's questions of that we ask across the board, right? We get the answers across the board to all those questions, and then each of us sits down individually and, based on these criterias, assigns a number to each of these three RFPs. And then we come in and say, I say that applicant 1 was a 90 and applicant 3 was a 30, or whatever the numbers are, and we can sit here and debate the numbers of those and figure out where the consensus is. But if we came up with those numbers and then did the questions, I think we'd be favoring them differently.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think we need to come up with the questions before we evaluate. And I think I'm not sure how we're gonna come up with questions without having a meeting. I don't think we can.
I think just forwarding, if, like, you could be the repository for questions that, any of us can forward you the questions. I read the RFPs and these are the questions that I'd asked, right? We could do it that way,
And then
right?
I can just make the common ones, make them all
Yeah.
sane, okay.
And
So what's the timeline now then?
Well, let's say.
questions
by Friday,
or, yeah, yeah.
and then we can send them out to the respondents on Monday. Give them, I think we should give them at least a week probably, and then.
I think they're gonna know their answers right away.
Okay. And then come back on, hang on one sec, come back on, well, you want to try to go for, I think a week from today, to have the questions sent out and answered may not be practical. We may not get a response from everybody
Yeah, I
quickly.
think 2 weeks from today is a reasonable time to have answers, and, I mean,
But I think we can get the questions out on Monday, let's say, and then call a meeting as soon as we get answers.
I think you have to, right now, we have to set a meeting date for the next meeting.
Okay. So let's say 2 weeks, but we could do it sooner if we get answers back sooner, if we want to like jumpstart this and get it done quicker.
Yeah, like I'd like to get back onto like, we met on Wednesday, so we go ahead and have the meeting for next Wednesday, and then the next Wednesday, and you can always cancel it.
Yeah. We can try that. I don't mind setting up one for a weekly meeting on Wednesday.
Just for the next, and then we've got town meeting, I have work to do for that, so.
Okay. So I'll set up a meeting for next Wednesday. And if we have the responses, let's do it. And if not, we'll do it the week after.
So just to be clear, all we're looking through, and then if there's a common question, or if there's just one question we want, but we want to kind of see what comes from that, we just submit that to you.
even if you had a question on one RFP, if you can frame it in such a way that it applies to all of
Yeah,
it.
send me all your,
That's what I meant to say.
send me all of them, and I'll, if there are some that are very similar, I'll merge them,
Okay,
and I'll try to make sure that everybody's questions get asked.
okay. So you have a hand,
Sorry, just one other thing, that some of the questions might not be for the applicants, they might be for like town council. So I know I have some questions for town council.
Like,
on
can
some
this
of
be
them.
done, for
Yes.
example?
Right, so those don't have to be tailored to the specific RFP.
okay. Yep, okay. So once we're done with this discussion, we have to open it up, because you do have a hand raised.
Okay.
So let's just go over the dates for, obviously, we don't know if we can get a room for meetings, but
I mean,
we can meet somewhere.
Yeah, I'm sure we can find it, or we can do it remote, we can do it online if we have to. So it would be,
So 9 and 16.
yeah,
The 16th is going to be, we already have a meeting on the 16th.
we do.
Yeah, we have to, Shaker Lane,
I am unavailable on the 23rd.
Are you available the 9th, next Wednesday?
Sure.
I can see what time the Shaker Lane meeting is. It's possible by 7:30 we're done, but I'm not
It's,
positive.
I think the Shaker Lane meeting, I have it on my calendar for 7 o'clock.
I have it on there for 6:30, but I could be wrong. I could look at the town newsletter, I'm sure it says.
I don't think we're gonna be done with that meeting in an hour.
No, I agree.
How about the 15th, on Tuesday, is that okay?
Wait a minute, so I have conservation, hold on. Yes, I think I can do the 15th.
Will, can you do the
I
15th?
think, yes.
Are you cool with that?
So we're,
I can make it work.
Okay.
so we're gonna go Wednesday the 9th, and then Tuesday
Yeah,
the 15th, and we'll figure out whether it's 7 or 7:30.
yeah, sounds good.
And then.
I'll try to make it 7:30, because I know 7 is too early for you.
So,
7:30 is helpful.
Okay,
yeah, for sure.
that's fine.
And then circling back to the original discussions, who would like to reach out to the former 3 to see if they would like to come to either of those
I will,
meetings?
I'll reach out.
Okay. So that's, okay. Amy, Jen,
And Brad. Yep.
Okay,
Okay,
thank you.
great. Should we let's go online?
You got
Oh,
Amy?
Amy, hi.
You have to click on her.
No, I don't have any control.
How come you're not moderator?
Because we have a professional in the room, in the back.
Come out and be part of our world.
Are you talking, Amy? Oh, she's talking, but we can't hear her.
Wait a minute, Amy. Amy, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine.
Okay,
There you
we
go.
got you.
Awesome, you're on. Can you just reintroduce yourself formally?
So I'm Amy Charlotte Lewis. I live at 309 Nagog Way. I'm speaking as a citizen and not really necessarily a former member of the ad hoc group. So I kind of just want to like take everybody back to like kind of the beginning of why we decided and voted on why selling the orchard was the right direction. Because just in sort of observing this conversation, everyone is now trying to figure out what the criteria is, how much it should be weighted, and really the challenge is we still have not heard from the public about what they want from the orchard and what they would like to see from the orchard. In addition, you don't know yet how much these applicants need from the town in terms of dollars spent on investing in our assets that we've never invested in the past 20 years. And in addition, we're clearly probably going, in my opinion, into an override for Shaker Lane. We are in a tight financial position. I don't believe, in my personal opinion, that the town has the appetite for funding a for-profit or nonprofit business. I think they would much rather see sell the property and have that new owner, run their business and make their own investments, not to the cost of the taxpayer. And in addition, and I'm concerned about the conversation around basically the race to the bottom. The person we want will be the person who wants the least amount of money from us. Because what you're saying is, we want the taxpayer to pay the least amount. We want the applicant to bear the burden of 20 years of non-investment, and then on top of that, make additional new investments, and they are not landowners. It doesn't become their assets, it's not generating their own wealth, or it doesn't show on their P&L, it doesn't show on their balance sheet, and you're really just taking advantage of them. And there's no guarantee at the end of the day that you won't pull the lease and sell it to somebody else, or even sell it to them at the end of the day. So for all of these reasons, because there's so much risk involved, so much unknown, and essentially taking advantage of other organizations or people to bear the cost of 20 years of our town's mistakes. It's not okay. I'm sorry, but this is just, you're also just there's so many variables involved in, evaluating a farm and its strength. I just sort of feel like I'm watching you guys just sort of guess on what we should be doing and how it should be weighted. A long time ago, I'm sure Sarah and Matt and Will remember, we talked about hiring someone to sort of write out this criteria. We identified someone with both municipal experience, some kind of agricultural experience. I don't, why aren't we engaging with this person again? It sort of took, it basically, put someone into the race that had no dog in the race, so to speak, that had more of an independent view. We're also sort of really doing this again with no public input about what people in town want, and we haven't heard from them yet. So, again, I'm going to go back to selling is really the right thing to do for the town and for the next potential owner of the farm. This is just becoming so complicated. I don't know. I think that's all I get to say. I'm sorry.
Okay, thanks.
That's it.
Rob, do you have something to say?
Sure.
Oh my God.
That was interesting.
Rob Brown's 25 Junior Road. I'll admit, I've not read the RFP, so I don't know if it's addressed. I apologize if it is addressed. As you discuss criteria, I think the previous working group just had discussions with regard to aspects that, in some ways, Amy brought up some aspects, but I want to pull in them a little bit. Aspects of length of lease. I don't know whether you stipulated a preference for that. Aspects of lease with regard to opportunity to purchase, after a period of time. I think those potentially, I at least could see scenarios where with regard to the longevity of looking for a successful management plan or successful relationship with the town, somewhat consistent with what Amy was just talking about with regard to how the town might be viewing whomever is a successful respondent, selected. I think those are aspects that I'd kind of like to hear, some consideration, or just hear flat out, Rob, we did deal with that. If you're able to give a response in that regard, I think that'd be helpful. I too share what I think I heard Amy talk about in terms of the town and the aspect of money. So my interest in the money, the town money aspect, has more to do with, if now is not the time, so be it. But at some point in time in your discussion, communication with the public, are you envisioning potentially a lease contingent upon a future town vote up to a decision to do X hundreds of $1,000s or $1 million over X period of time, whatever phase and plan, but just addressing some aspect of how you're, in your deliberations, coming to a determination and an evaluation, because I'm of the opinion, based on my past knowledge of the working group sessions, that that's a pretty significant aspect that is an unknown, and I don't see how it can not be addressed within your deliberations that I assume are going to be, somewhat executive session orientation. So thanks for the time.
Those are good questions. I know that prior we had chatted with applicants, what was their option, like did they want to lease with an option to buy? And then we've talked about there being a line item for the budget, an annual, and that the town's people would have to vote or not vote for that. But it is not, it's a good point for Rob, that it's not reflected in the questions that we asked in the RFP. And so that's a question, like, do you envision, do you have an interest in purchasing, and what's your span? Do you want 30 years? Do you want 90 years?
I think at least one of the applicants did include
Right.
that as a request.
So that might be a quick question to
Yeah.
ask.
So that is actually one of my questions to town council, whether we can actually enter into an agreement where, that someone would then, if you're leasing it, we're favoring you for a sale.
Right.
Right, and I do not know if we can legally do that, so that is one question we need to ask.
So I think that discussion did happen in terms of right of first refusal. So you can have a lease, and then you can have a right of first refusal, but it carries the same weight versus, say you both want the same lease, you want to potentially buy, it has no bearing. So that you could be offered a right of first refusal.
And the more I think about it, the cost the town has to bear really should be less of a discussion for this group and more of a discussion and for the lease negotiations piece, right? Because this group doesn't have any control over any of the funding. And we don't know how the lease negotiations would go on that funding anyway. And as Rob said, it may be contingent on a town meeting vote or something else happening. So that's not something that, I'm not saying we shouldn't give it no weight, but it shouldn't be like a dominating weight for this group.
Yeah, I think understood that we don't control the purse strings, but also we shouldn't evaluate this in a vacuum. Like,
Yes.
if it's clear that one of these proposals is going to cost the town $100 million, I think we all know that that's not going to pass.
Right.
So, we should, yeah, you're right. We shouldn't weight it heavily, but we should
But
include.
in the same way, if they say they're gonna set up a unicorn farm, we know that's not gonna
Yeah,
happen
right, yeah,
either, so
right.
it's, but I think most of the rest of these criteria are things that we'd be looking at whether we are leasing or selling the property, and we'd be doing the same decisions, so.
And, I understand Amy's concerns. It would be better to sell it, but we don't have that choice because the town didn't vote for it. And we can't, the select board hasn't told us to go out and sell it. They've told us to go out and lease it. So at this point, I don't know, I I don't know what else we can do, except follow the path that we're on right now.
And if we fail and these three applicants were interested in leasing on the terms that we laid out, so we can figure out, whether we can successfully execute a lease or not, right?
Yeah.
And your thought was not to involve MAPC unless we did not have a potential lease.
So my thought is to continue with MAPC, to continue at least for two reasons. One is I think that there still could be some value in getting feedback from the public on what they think that the highest and best use of the orchard is. How many people want to be hiking in it? How many people want to do pick your own? How many, I think that and the other thing is in the other direction, letting people understand that leasing it is going to incur some monetary obligations from the town. And I think that public sessions with like some details like, hey, we're going to have to pull the trees up and replace the walls of the barn, and it's going to cost us this many millions of dollars.
So then shouldn't this be put on hold and that should have been done?
The MAPC?
Yeah.
Well, the MAPC thing is moving forward as quickly as we can. So the other reason to keep going with it is if we don't get to a lease and we want to bring this sale back in the spring, the MAPC thing is still legitimate.
So when is MAPC?
I've actually just had my first email with them today. So we're talking about, getting going next month. Starting with the meetings this month, next month. But they have,
The public forums were January.
yeah, the public forums would be next year because of their
Okay, so then
their
you're not just
obligations.
losing the 25 season, you might potentially be losing the 26 growing season. So I think if we wait till January, and then we're gonna go into negotiation with a lease, that,
We
No,
can, the lease and the MAPC are independent. We can be negotiating with the lease and continue on the MAPC path.
but if you commit to someone, say for 30 years, 29 years, you all, Board of Selectmen can enter into an agreement tomorrow. You have the right to do that without any any input from anyone. You can do that. And so that can be up to 30 years without going back to the town vote. So why would we bother with MAPC if you potentially have someone that you're going to sign on the line for 30 years?
Yeah, I mean, when we have a signed lease, you're right, the MAPC, it's like, it doesn't matter at that point.
It matters
You're
less.
kinda-
There's still other pieces. I mean, the house is still what we're going to do with the house, the lower barn. There's other things that aren't covered by the lease. And it could also help, maybe it helps influence the farmer's business plan when someone says, hey, we really need, another pumpkin farm in town or something, right?
How much is the MAPC?
We got a
It's
grant,
free.
Okay. Thank you, I wasn't aware of that.
yeah.
Okay.
But I agree with you.
No, I mean, so what I'm worried about is the lease falls through and then we get to the Springtown meeting and we haven't done any of the legwork to prepare for a vote.
So I've been on this committee for 3 years, and now that is even, if I'm confused by that, I think people tuning in for the first time are going to be confused.
Confused in what
In
way?
terms of why we go down one path, and where potentially you could find someone that's your new perfect lease, and they may want to go into negotiation, take the top barn, the lower barn, the cottage, forget the house. So you've got that unicorn. And now we're still gonna go to MAPC and still have the meetings for MAPC. We're gonna have an MAPC meeting just for the house?
We can pull the plug on the MAPC if the lease is going well. So, but if the lease falls through, we would have no ability to restart MAPC.
And it took a while to get that started.
I am aware. We've
Yeah.
been at it for a long time. Okay.
Kristen?
Do I need to go?
Yeah, would you, just so people at home can hear your beautiful voice?
Hi, Kristen Kazokis, 6 Cottage Way. I'm a little disappointed that we didn't get the opportunity for the public to have a say in terms of the writing of this RFP. And I think that those public meetings are important and that public input is important. And so why aren't we being asked before you go into your lease negotiations what we as the public want versus after. So that's a little, doesn't feel great. Because some of the things that I think are important because of the surrounding lands of the orchard and the history of the orchard land is the cultural components, the indigenous tribal factor, and also the environment. In the last 5 years, there hasn't been pesticide use on that land, and we have the bald eagles back. There's also the whole thing about the land that isn't APR. If the person that wants the APR land also doesn't want the town land that is available for lease, that then becomes another financial burden on the town to take care of that leased land or land that could be leased. So that's also one of the factors to maybe take into consideration. I know that's a completely different topic, pathway that you're going, but it's part of the whole package and to look at that land holistically. Yeah, so, and I just think that really what does the town want from the land and what we want to see with the land is more than just farming. There's all sorts of different farming practices that can incorporate the cultural, the history, our relationship with the land. And I believe that the Neshoba Praying Indians having an interest to be back on that land is a huge component and should be taken into consideration. So, thank you.
Just for one point of clarification, the only thing that was in the RFP was the APR land and the barn. Nothing that wasn't nothing that was not under APR is in this except the barn.
I understand that. So then the question is the town prepared to have a budget line item to take care of the rest of the land that's not part of the APR?
I mean, we're sort of already doing it. I mean,
Not well.
we're not doing much. But
Thank you for that clarity.
we're not doing much, but we are,
We're
I mean,
doing,
we're already,
all we're doing is mowing.
yeah, and
So-
barely that. But, you know, no shade on
I
DPW.
agree with you that we need to do more, but this RFP was a start. It was getting the property that we legally have to do something with moving forward. And there's other pieces, the lower barn and the cottage and everything, and that we have to do something with, but this is a big elephant, and we needed to figure out how to make it a little smaller. So I agree with you, we need to have a plan for that. But I think if we make it too big, then it becomes impossible to make any progress.
I also agree with you that it would have been great to have public sessions before this, and we couldn't. Like, I don't have the time and expertise to run them. I don't think anybody else on this board does. And MAPC was a good choice, and they were the only people that we found who could do it, and they couldn't start until next year. So, I mean, if we could wait until we get the perfect setup and everybody gets their input, but I think everybody here is frustrated with how long things have been taking. And so at some point, we have to say, all right, well, here's the vote, here's the thing that we can do, which is the select board says try to lease it, and so we're trying to lease it.
Right.
So, like, we're constrained in many ways by a lot of the things that have happened, and I think we're doing our best to, like, get forward as quickly as we can.
Well, I think the fact that you guys are having meetings again and they're public meetings is a good opportunity for the public to be able to come and hear what's going on and be able to speak. I'm just going to offer this as a possible suggestion. Is there a way for if people that have questions or certain criteria of what they want from the land that can actually just send you guys an email or let you guys know?
Why don't we
Yeah.
make that the next meeting so that we can submit our questions, or we just wait and come up with different questions or considerations for the next meeting?
So I think people can email Orchard Responses, which is the email address that we used for RFP responses and questions.
What is that?
It's on the Orchard webpage.
Does anybody here have that exact address so we can just tell everybody?
Yeah.
Please?
It's Orchard-responses. I'll look.
Okay, thank you.
But to Kristen's point, a lot of people didn't know about this meeting, so because everyone knew that we were on pause for a
Yeah.
while, how do we ask the public, do you have questions?
Well, I think Mr. Stolo, who's on the Zoom meeting, can distribute it to his mailing list. I think that the people who are here now, and I'm sure Mr. MacGyver's watching at home, and he, those people who are aware of our goings-on are gonna be involved. Beyond that circle of people, I'm not sure who is invested in this process.
Okay.
But it's orchard_responses@littletonma.org.
So you have a hand up from Amy and from Rob.
Amy, do you want to,
You have to ask.
can we unmute Amy?
Oh, sorry, can you hear me now?
Yep, go ahead, Amy.
All right, so, for 3.5 years, this orchard group had talked about the importance of keeping the house and the barn attached to the land for a variety of reasons that I'm not going to go over again. So this is really a departure from all those conversations. We had worked, spent a lot of time talking to NJAR, trying to get the barn pulled into the APR. They said they were willing to do it. The historical committee in town, put a lot of effort into looking into the house and the barn in terms of its historical properties, what kinds of restrictions we could put on it to try to protect it. We've gone through great lengths to try to keep this house and this barn attached to this piece of land because farmers need housing and they need a barn to be functional. No one has ever talked about separating them, selling them off as just like regular real estate. So this is really different. And then again, this decision to go out to RFP to lease this land was really made in a decision with 2 board of selectmen and the town administrator and someone from MDR. This never came to an open public ad hoc committee meeting to discuss. So, you're moving forward in this way without having really discussed it with the public. So they're already confused. And then this idea is that, we're going to go down this lease process, but at the same time, we're going to have this MAPC process, and then what happens if, you go through this lease and at the same time you're talking to the public and then you seal the deal with the lease and then you've just essentially ignored everything the public has said. The optics are just not going to be great. And then if you get a situation where, the ideal lease person, why, and then what are you going to do then? You've got you've already moved forward with someone, but people in town don't like it. I think you're going to end up in the crosshairs. This is again why we talked about selling the property, because it was the smoothest, most simplest, cleanest thing. And I know people are tired of the orchard. The board of selectmen spent tons of time on it, but I would recommend going back to town meeting and asking permission to sell the land. The select board does have the authority to declare it as surplus. They just don't want to do it because the optics on it are so bad. And I understand, but I think you're just going down this path where there's just so many complications. This isn't going to sort of really work out so well for everybody. I don't know. I think people are going to be really upset if the house and the barn get sold to a developer and are permanently removed from that piece of land. You will then lower the value of that piece of land forever. I would really recommend getting back on track with our original plan of, having MPC meetings and then going back to town meeting after people have had more input and more education. It may take a little bit longer, but if they, by May town meeting, it's going to be kind of hard to recover from that. I know that's all I get to say.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So we haven't separated any of the land. It's all still owned by this town. If this lease goes through, we still own everything until we decide, if we decide at a later date to sell the house or to sell if we can do, preferred sale to the tenant, we can do that. These management plans, we could pick a farmer to sell to, and they're gonna say, this is what they're gonna do for 5 years, and then they find out that it's not profitable, and then they change to something else. It's no different whether we sell it or lease it. We have the exact same problems on all of that.
Yes, with one regards, with the barn, MDR had agreed that the barn can come into ag. So I believe that the barn at least could be preserved under APR. So I think that's a different option. The house is,
Right, but we haven't done anything to say whether the barn's preserved or not in this lease agreement, right? We can still take that forward if we so choose, right?
and I feel as though that should have been done months ago when we had approval to do that. I do not understand why the Board of Selectmen did not move the barn into APR.
I feel like you're trying to create too many options and keep all your options available to you and just kind of shift and move and duck and dive at the town's leisure and pleasure. It's like, that is not a way to be a good, holding land and being in partnership with a farmer. I think you're just really going to undermine the process and our reputation. I would not go down this path.
I agree, we're not being good stewards of the land, and we're not holding forth the Morrison's mission. So I do agree with those.
In order to be good stewards of the land, requiring someone to take on the responsibility and obligation of any of the structures could derail the success of whatever their endeavor is.
Yeah.
I think that the town, was there 2 or 3 different information sessions that were held by the Orchard Working Group with visits up at the orchard and educational opportunities. The result was that it came before town meeting, it was voted not to sell it, and we're taking the next step. That's what this group has consistently been doing for the past 3.5 years. There's no direct path for this. All we can do is take the next step. Where it was voted down to sell it, we're putting forward the opportunity for someone to lease it. Obviously, with the lease, there's going to be more questions that are going to evolve, and we're going to do our best to answer the questions with this group making recommendations to the select board. I can see pros and cons of having the barn in APR or not in APR. It's another data point that we can digest, I guess, with the RFP responses on this.
So that's
round
another
RFP.
question that we should ask all of them. Are you interested in?
I would hope that would come up in the management plan and the capital plan, because either of those would require a need in the management plan and a capital plan for an investment along.
Did the language, and I apologize probably because of the hour, did the RFP state clearly that was it? I know we said it was a potential option, but did we have a directive so that, like, are you actually going to want that option?
No, we didn't ask the question. It said something like, these are not included, but could be leased, like, based on, another agreement.
Right, so that was just kind of,
Yeah, it was not, we didn't ask them whether they were interested in it. Okay, Rob?
Before Rob speaks,
Yeah.
I would, go ahead. Well, I would disagree with you, Sarah, that there's any reason to put the barn under APR while we still own it. If we go to sell it or something else with it, we should do something with it. But while we own it, what does an APR restriction buy the town?
well, it reduces the rate that someone potentially, if they need to buy it.
But we're not,
Ultimately.
but until we go to sell it or do something with it, what advantage of putting a structure we own under a restriction?
What are your thoughts on the historical value of it? Dating
On the
back
barn?
from 1740 or
I don't want anything to
1760?
happen to the barn. I'm not suggesting that I want,
But I've asked numerous times to put a historical preservation on it. And that,
Was the historical preservation was for a set number of years, not in perpetuity?
no, it's in perpetuity.
Oh, it isn't.
I think it was a deed restriction that would be in perpetuity. And as far as I know, like, the Historical Commission is still game to do it, it's just, we haven't been
No,
pursuing
they
it.
asked and basically we said no. The committee said no. Board of Selectmen said, no, we're gonna wait. I will leave this town if something happens to that barn.
Okay, Rob.
So I want to appeal that Sarah and Amy, my recollection in December of last year, I think, had essentially a standing room only crowd assembled for what I feel was a very good summary of where it was heading towards the direction of the working group. And yet, equally contained within that meeting was a great deal of public input and the opportunity for dialogue with the working group. I would present that each of you, along with the former members that you discussed earlier tonight, have that same capability, with them possibly being more the subject matter experts, although new members bring new expertise. You know, you're all very, very skilled, far more. There may be good reasons to not do what I'm suggesting, but I've been advocating very strongly, as best I can, for get the public input. I believe I can even make an argument that should you not be able to go public MAPC meeting until January, that you would benefit immensely from an opportunity for the public to present to you questions. Maybe you have to start off with, these items are open for input and engagement tonight, and these items are a parking lot issue that cannot and will not be addressed. And if you care to, give them reasons for it or not. But you're very, very skilled people, and I think there's got to be some way to convene a meeting for public hearing between May and January of the next year. So that's my real, request, because I think it'll benefit, if nothing else, the public feeling a sense that you're listening and giving them the opportunity to be heard. Thank you.
And I appreciate that, Rob. Sometimes I feel like for the last 3.5 years, and kudos to you, you show up for meetings, Kristen shows up, and there's people that are involved. But it's very disheartening when we have someone come to the meetings and ask questions because they never read the minutes, they never watched. And I just want to keep going forward. And I feel if I welcome all input, but I also want people to do their history. And so to watch any of the minutes from way back when and to understand what the history was, and, adopt a tree doesn't work. You can't do that. So.
Don't look at me.
Sure.
I'm not in charge.
One more.
Thank you. And so in response, because it's valid, completely valid, having said that, I found myself in the last week and a half speaking with somebody and saying, as soon as the public hearing comes, with all due respect, I would like the people behind the adopt tree, I'd like to put them on the record what efforts have been undertaken since that really last second pitch that I became aware of did tremendous impact potentially with the public, influencing that vote. So I don't want it to, in my opinion, it was effectively a torpedo. And it hit, in my opinion, may be wrong, but it was just a 3-vote difference. And so, again, I would argue as much as what I heard Sarah properly state, that having the public being allowed to air and ask for some questions to be raised of those who have other ideas, step forward. Or, remove yourself from the conversation, please. We need to your point, it's a huge elephant. But it's been this way for a long period of time. You're taking efforts that you think I know are in the best interest to get forward, and I applaud those efforts, even if I don't agree with them. I'm trying to identify other ways to gather other people who think they have the best efforts. Okay, well, let's get in the sense of, are you doing anything? Because if you're not, don't stand in the way, please. Thank you.
So while you're up there, Rob, before you leave, I'm going to put you on the spot.
Okay.
Okay? So everyone's been saying we need more public input. We have 3 RFPs. We've outlined the criteria that we're going to evaluate the RFP. What would you like us to do differently?
We
What
did
input
RFI.
are you,
The RFI, too.
well, we had the RFI, yeah. What would you like us to do differently between now and the next month? What should we be doing differently?
So I may be wrong, but I think that there was, with regard to the MBTA vote, I thought that Brian Tarbox at the town meeting gave a very forceful presentation with regard to a reality assessment of what the implications of voting that warrant down at May's town meeting was, and that followed from a 10-minute presentation from Jeff Yates that kind of laid out the overall, but it just gave a little piece with regard to the financial, noose that would be created. So, specific response, I don't feel that the financial challenges presented by the vote were adequately absorbed. To your point, yes, 3 RFPs, RFIs, yeah. The working group, unfortunately, I don't think ever got adequate consideration from the town of Littleton residents. It's a very, very sad occasion, but I'm also of the opinion, I think on record with some of you, with regard to, unfortunately, these controversial or nuanced and challenging comprehensive issues, Webster, Orchard, the town has proven they're not up to the task. And so I'm still punching the bag, trying to break out, and that's the spirit in which I offer this. So if I spoke too long, the concerted effort, Tim Goddard, if that's his name, he at some point with regard to different meetings, people go up and speak, and it's basically the same thing, just a different face saying the same words. I really think an organized campaign of citizenry with regard to specific 2-minute bullet points with regard to, you're going to speak to this, you're going to speak to that, you're going to speak to this, you're going to speak to that, and slaughter all the open questions. Slaughter meaning present them. Really get into it in a tight 2-minute script to explain, here's the implications that are before you, residents. Please be informed. We're doing as best we can to get you informed as quickly as we can so that informed citizenry can make a proper decision.
So, we still have 3 RFPs we have to evaluate, right? So, what do you want us to do differently than we've suggested here today? I agree with you that I would have preferred we're not here and we're on the path to sell. And we might still be on the path to sell in May. But right now, we have 3 RFPs. Everyone's saying we need more public input. What input do you hope to gather on these RFPs, or help us to evaluate these RFPs?
My apologies. I am not attempting to derail your evaluation of the 3 respondents. I am not in that camp. I was speaking more with regard to the public hearing as some of the conversation I thought was starting to drift into the scenario of, if we don't find a respondent that is acceptable, that we're going to move on with MAPC, and you're already under MAPC, and you'll pull it if you come to a success. But I'm already, quite frankly, I'm fine with parallel paths. My appeal is not to derail the 3 respondents with your evaluation as you're discussing it tonight, and you'll continue in your future meetings. My appeal is to really build up that other track so it's ready and already moving. Quite frankly, there was somebody, maybe Sarah, I'm not sure, made a response of, how are we going to bring out the people to understand it, since they, more or less not participated to the extent that we would like in the past. I'm more of the opinion, much like the town vote within the week after the town vote, I didn't have to say a word before the orchard. 1 month later, now crickets. We have to get back to that level of awareness, because guess what? We're going to compete against Shaker Lane. Who knows what else we're going to be competing against. And so, I'll pick on Will for a second. I remember saying, I am for getting the acres farmed as quickly as we can get it done. Let's do it. If that's the RFP for lease, or the respondent to lease, I'm all for it. I hope they're clear. Don't want to take any more time.
Thanks. I'd like to put this to bed. I just want to summarize what we're going to do
Okay.
next.
Yep.
So we are going to, you all are going to submit your questions
Mm-hmm.
to either the respondents or to town council to me. I'm going to summarize, actually, the town council, you can just send them to Jim, right? You don't need to,
And I'll send them to you. And
No, let's
Okay.
just be clear. Let's just send,
Everything
if
we
we
need.
have any
Okay.
questions, it's going to go right to
Okay.
you.
So I'm going to summarize them all, and then I'm going to bring them back now, you think, to the next meeting on the 9th. Because you said like, okay, well, let's have the public have questions as well in that meeting.
Can I retract that?
You can.
Like, I want to keep this
Okay.
going, and there has to be some faith.
Yeah,
So
okay,
I'll do whatever you want.
okay. So let's go with the original plan. So by Friday, get me your questions. I will summarize them and send them to the respondents on Monday. And if we have answers by Wednesday, the 9th, we can talk about it then, and if we don't, we'll do it on the next week.
Just one question. On the 9th, do we want to ask the respondents if they want to come in and give a presentation?
So I think we need to make sure that all three of them can do that. So I think it's probably too soon to do it on the 9th.
Yeah.
I do think we should ask all of them to participate, but it just feels like it would be really quick for them to show up.
Do you want to
and
do a
answer
save the
questions.
date for the
The 15th,
15th?
yeah, maybe when I send them the questions, I'll say,
Just say potentially.
Yeah. yep. Okay.
The other question we need to ask is when we're doing these evaluations of the scores, whether it's an open meeting or an executive session.
I think
It seems like a deliberation.
it does. I am hard pressed to think of what exclusion we could use to keep it from being an open meeting.
I mean, when they're evaluating the construction people for the senior center, the library and things, I don't know that those were open meetings, but I don't know that they weren't. So it's just something we should ask
Okay.
to verify.
Could you follow up with Jim or
Yeah.
town council on
You
that
have to
one?
do that tomorrow because you still have to post for,
Well, we do that on the 15th, so when we're actually evaluating the respondents.
oh, okay, thank
Yeah.
you. Yep.
But yeah, we should, yeah.
Right. And who's going to post, you'll post the
I'll
agenda?
post the agenda for the 9th.
Okay.
So right now, all we have is review the questions,
Approved minutes.
approve minutes, and then, I mean, do we want to talk more about the criteria, or do we want to discuss the respondents' specifics, like as they relate to the criteria on the 9th? We're going to be ready to do that?
Yes.
Or do you want it to wait until we have the questions and answers?
Well, the hope would be that we would discuss, like, the three applicants on the 9th.
Even if we haven't gotten their answers to the questions?
I'm hopeful.
Okay, but let's say that someone doesn't respond, because
Right. Yep.
one of them, I think, isn't going to respond
But
in a timely manner. But anyway, like, well, let's say that one doesn't. Like, then do we do partial discussion of the criteria or wait until we have full answers? I think it would be better to wait until we have all the answers.
how long are you going to wait?
Another week? Till the 15th?
Okay.
What do you think?
I don't know that we need both meetings. I think by the time we're, yeah.
I'm hopeful that if the communication, it has a sense of urgency to it, based on the fact that we need to arrive at a conclusion to this in order for people who have a management plan in place that are gonna be looking at crop inputs for next year.
Yeah.
That they can get a sense of urgency, that they'll get back to you because they took the time to respond, they're interested, and they have an understanding of the growing season, planning, strategizing.
Yeah,
So
okay.
I would think we could, if we have a real outlier question that we didn't get an answer to,
It's in their best interest. to
Okay,
respond.
sure, so let's try it for the 9th then.
May I suggest something?
Yeah,
If you have a contact information, you could say, we are working, thank you for your RFPs. We are, as a group, may have some questions. We'll be sending them on Monday.
Mhm.
Can you please have your responses? So if you let them know ahead of time that you'll be sending them on Monday, then they're aware and they
To
can
those three that we
make that time.
Yeah, thank you, Kristen.
yeah, that's a good idea, thank you. I'll do that.
So we're gonna have them to you for Friday, and you're gonna send them to them.
Monday morning.
So on Friday night.
Yeah, or Friday night, maybe. Okay,
Kristen has a motion.
yeah.
I have one more question. So there were 3 respondents. Were there any others that didn't?
There was a 4th one that only submitted half of the RFP response, and so we actually can't consider them as a respondent.
Do they get notified, or is it?
I honestly don't know whether Ryan or Jim responded to that.
I don't even know who that person was.
Yeah,
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Just curious.
I move that we adjourn the meeting at 9:02 PM.
all those in favor?
I,
Good night, thank you, Littleton.
Thank you, whoever that is running the